What if reality is not what it seems? Imagine a moment where the past, present, and future merge into one. Ancient temples, cosmic mysteries, and hidden truths, all connected by threads we barely understand. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Lynn, esoteric historian, decoding the secrets of ancient wisdom. Tonight, I'm joined by a true explorer of the paranormal, Mike Ricksecker. Mike is an author and researcher with profound insight into the supernatural. Whether he's exploring the Stargates of ancient Egypt, uncovering the secrets of shadow people, or exploring the ancient alien connection, Mike seeks to unravel the threads that weave our past, present, and future. Get ready to journey into our connected universe. The Midnight Academy starts now.
According to Nietzsche, there are two different types of people in the world: those who want to know and those who want to believe. You have arrived at the crossroads of mind and matter. The Midnight Academy with Dr. Heather Lynn.
I've been listening to your book.
Thank you.
No, it's fantastic so far. I generally don't have as much time as I'd like to physically read the book in the old-fashioned way. So I was so glad to see that you had an audiobook version. And I was also glad to see that you were the one narrating it, because it just made for a much better experience. And you're a very, very good narrator. It sounded very
Thank you.
professional. So I was like, wow, this
try.
is fantastic. Very well produced. The music wasn't distracting. I say that because I've had some audiobooks where the whole thing is just a little too produced, and it's just, so it strikes a very good balance, and it was just super enjoyable and educational. So I highly recommend this book. It is fantastic, great introduction to time travel, which I needed, because honestly, I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about time travel. I am interested in things like string theory. I'm interested in some of the more conventional explanations for the strangeness that we experience in our universe. But the whole thing for me about time travel could be summed up in maybe two words: John Teeter. To me, that's, if anyone remembers that, it's fun. I don't know what to make of it, but that's about where my actual knowledge stayed. And it was just kind of a quirk. But in your book, you don't address it that way. It's not just some strange little quirk or a piece of science fiction. It's very possible. And I can't believe I'm even saying that, but I'm at this point now where I've had to reconsider so many different things based on the revelations that not only are in your book, but then led me to go down different paths and look at other researchers and really reconsider the question of whether or not time travel is not just theoretically possible, but is it practically possible, or even actually already happening?
Yeah, it's a subject I've been fascinated with forever. Ever since I was a kid, and not just because of, like Back to the Future and just hop in the DeLorean and zip off 88 miles per hour. It'd be a lot of fun, definitely. But no, it goes back to Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. And the work was based on Richard Matheson's book, Bid Time Return. And he actually wrote the screenplay as well. If you buy the book now, they've retitled the book to Somewhere in Time, so people know where to look for it. But he had, in his work, he had actually done a lot of research from science perspective, other philosophers, other people who had looked into the whole aspect of what real time travel would look like. And in the book itself, he actually he has Richard go to a library and a bookstore, which we kind of see that in the movie when he's trying to find information on the woman that he's interested in from all the way back in 1912. But we see him in the book version actually look up information on time travel. And he's getting books from like J.B. Priestley. And the one chapter in Matheson's book is almost like a mini book review of Priestley's book. And so when I read that, I was like, okay, this is interesting. So he didn't just like pull this out of his head as a kind of science fiction sort of gimmick, he actually put some time and effort and research into this based on these other works. So I had to, of course, go and find them myself. And so, um, yeah, when they start that examination of what uh, the fourth dimension really is, and you start applying our current physics to it, and the way that we look at the universe right now, having up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions, you can start to see how time travel may actually be possible if you can, and this is the trick, get yourself out of the fourth dimension and go to those higher dimensions, which would actually see all time as a physical object.
Wow. That's kind of along the line of the Stargate premise, I think. It relates to that, at least in my view. I started researching Stargates a while back, and I was interested in maybe that more material concept of
Mhm.
a Stargate because I
Yeah.
tend to focus on the material. Archaeology is a background science and that sort of thing, to a fault. It's not, it's not all the answers are found in scientific materialism. So I start looking into Stargates and thinking, people aren't walking through these like stone holes that look like there's something from the shows. And but I
Right.
started to see that there was something a lot deeper with that too. It's not actually physically walking through something alone, we'll say. But it
Mhm.
just reminds me of that if you look at some of these pop cultural references like time travel, getting in a DeLorean or going through a Stargate and it looks like the one on the television show, then it's super easy to just dismiss it as science fiction because you're looking at it through that perspective. But if you can take the look that you do, which is a little deeper and more thoughtful, it starts to all make sense and become more plausible.
Yeah, and that's kind of ironic because that's my next book is Stargates.
Oh wow. It seems to track though. So that's
It
really cool.
it does. Well, I host the Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour, so which we'll be doing that again next November. But yeah, that's been a fascination of mine as well, and it does kind of go back, of course, to the movies. But I mean, really, what did it was 1993. You had Mysteries of the Sphinx come out, so that's John Anthony West, Robert Schoch when they're redating the Sphinx. Charlton Heston, hosted that whole thing, and it was within months because it came out in '94. The movie Stargate. So those back to back like that really kind of inspired me down that path, and I think that's where we can really look at our science fiction. But yeah, it's very Hollywood and very glamorous and all of that. But I think it helps to inspire people to ask the questions. And there are, a handful of us that will actually start making those steps and doing some real research into, okay, is this possible? Is there a grain of truth embedded in this story here?
Yeah. Well, is there?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah.
What is the can
Otherwise, I
you
wouldn't still be here.
right. Well, I don't know. I'm sort of led by sheer curiosity. So
Mhm.
I don't know that I believe much of anything. And so I'm always interested in hearing people who have come to some sort of conclusion, or at least thus far that they may believe, which would lead me to ask you, I know there's many things, but if you had to pick one piece of the most compelling evidence for time travel, what would that be?
That it currently exists?
Yes.
I think,
Or maybe that it did in the past even.
yeah. And see, I think that we are experiencing time travel from time to time without even realizing it. So this kind of almost goes back into my paranormal roots, where we're going on investigations, and sure, we're looking for ghosts, but the way that I always handle those investigations was I always believed that I was having a conversation with somebody. I wasn't looking for jump scares. I wasn't even necessarily looking for like meters and things to light up or get like a cool piece of video footage. It's I'm having a conversation with somebody who had once lived in the past, and we start uh, looking at it from, okay, all time is concurrent, all ever present. Um, then we could actually even be talking to people from the future. So, all of that said, I believe that some of these different things that we are seeing and experiencing are what we would call a type of time slip. And there are some really, really fascinating stories, like the famous poet Goethe. He's walking down there, and he wrote about this in his book, Dichtung und Wahrheit, as an actual experience that he had. He's walking down the road toward Drissenheim one day, and as he's walking down this one part of the road, he's just kind of lost in his thoughts. He's having an affair with a young woman in the town, and he's just kind of daydreaming almost. We do this when we're driving down the road, we zone out, we miss our exit, that sort of thing. Well, he's doing that as he's walking, and all of a sudden he notices on the other side of the road this man in this interesting looking gold trimmed gray suit. He turns to get a better look at the gentleman. All of a sudden, poof, he just disappears. It's like, what the heck was that? Nothing he can do about it because the guy totally disappeared, but definitely got his attention, continues on his walk. Well, it's years later that he's walking down that same road again, this time in the opposite direction. And he's coming upon that spot where he had that previous incident. And he looks down and it dawns on him, oh my gosh, I was the man in the gold trim gray suit. I'm actually wearing the thing right now. So he had actually seen himself at another point in time. And okay, so what was the catalyst there? How did that happen that he got a glimpse of himself? This gets chalked up to a doppelganger case. If you look up like top 20 doppelganger cases on Google, this will pop up. I don't believe it's a doppelganger at all. I believe it's a form of time slip. And I believe what happened was, you got to go back to the beginning of the story where he was initially walking down that road and he's lost in his thoughts. Well, it's a type of meditative state. And again, we kind of do this all the time when we're driving and we zone out and miss the exit, that sort of thing. Sometimes we're doing just tedious menial tasks like, washing the dishes, mowing the lawn. We kind of drift off a little bit. And so it's a type of meditative state. So I believe what happened was that he was able to tune into his own frequency there at that moment, or two different moments there in time. He was able to tune into his own frequency, get a little glimpse. And when he turned to get a better look at himself, it broke him out of that meditative state and he lost the vision of it.
Wow. Is that something akin to deja vu? Would deja vu be like a experience or of a time slip or something like that?
Yeah, deja vu would be similar to that. And there are a couple different reasons that might be. Which, I mean, this is kind of an example here where it's related. In our dream state, a lot of times we have those dreams that just they happen to come true like a day, a week, a month later, or whatever. It's like a premonition. And I believe that that's because we enter into different brainwave states as we sleep. And so I believe that our consciousness is entering into some of these different states and is able to kind of free float there throughout the fourth dimension and get these other glimpses of time and bring that back. Sometimes it's that full experience that we end up having, like, oh my gosh, I was everything that I just saw, that what that person said, everything is exactly the same. Sometimes it's not that full and concrete. Sometimes it's just a little hints. This seems really familiar, because a lot of times when we sleep and dream, we don't bring back the whole dream with us. Sometimes just like a little fragment, and you go to tell somebody, I had this really interesting dream and I was over here and oh shoot, what was it?
Yeah.
And you lose the dream. That happens. So, and that can become like a deja vu moment. Yeah.
If this premise is accurate and we go to sleep and there are times where we enter some sort of a brainwave state that we can get a glimpse of the future, would it be possible maybe that through processes like lucid dreaming or anything like that, that we could not only get a better glimpse of the future, but maybe even change it?
I believe so. This is kind of what Matheson was talking about again in Somewhere in Time. Although, I mean, basically what he did was he had his character Richard Collier just convince himself that he was back in 1912. So it's really, if you think about it, though, that is setting an intention. So if you were to sit down and meditate and say, okay, this is what I am looking to do, and put yourself into that meditative state, some sort of akin to lucid dreaming, that sort of thing. So I believe that we could project our consciousness somewhere else and be able to experience that point in time. Now, people will say, well, what about the physical body? Is it just the consciousness? And I think that's kind of the trick here is, how could you send the whole physical body to that other point in time? At this point, I believe real time travel has more to do with the consciousness.
Some people suggest this. This is way out there. But I've heard some suggestions. So you're familiar, I'm sure, with Michael Cremo's work in Forbidden Archaeology. And the thesis he generally posits it's that there's extreme human antiquity, that a lot of the out of place artifacts and things, they're there because people were so much more advanced than we credit them. And they have left evidence behind in the archaeological or fossil record. There are some people who have suggested, even specifically Cremo's work, that those artifacts, that evidence that's presented as evidence for extreme human antiquity, is actually evidence for time travel, and that those are things that have been left behind, we'll say, by time travelers. That it's not necessarily a consequence of human evolution, putting it on the trail and whatnot, but some of these things are out of place. Say, for instance, a high technology. So if you find something that's highly technologically advanced, we would generally say, well, those of us that may be like alternative minded may say, wow, this might push back the history timeline of humanity this far or what have you. But I have heard some suggest that it doesn't necessarily do that. Instead, it may actually support the evidence of individuals from our future meddling in our past and leaving something behind, whether by accident or on purpose. Does that sound too out there for you? Or
no, it doesn't. It actually it kind of goes down the road of the Stargates and portals. You know, is that if there is a way to physically move about through time, is it using something like that? When I just got back from Alaska, literally 5:30 this morning, and you know, we're talking about the Alaska Triangle up there, and there are a lot of missing airplanes up there. And when I was on the Alaska Triangle television show, one of the theories that we postulated was that some of these airplanes could be disappearing through some sort of portal. And of course, we brought Bruce Gernon on the show to talk about his experience in the Bermuda Triangle with that. And so, and that for him was really a type of time travel experience. Like he just suddenly zipped ahead in time by half an hour, something like that. And so throwing this idea out there about these planes going missing, if they do pass through some sort of portal, you know, people start asking, okay, where's the portal go? You know, does it go to some other dimension? Does it go to some other place in the cosmos? Or does it go to another point in time? So, you know, when I've given this example, I just use an arbitrary number. Let's say, fine, it goes through this portal and it goes back 500 years. Okay. So, what would the indigenous peoples of that time think of when all of a sudden they, you know, see an airplane pass across their sky? They have no context whatsoever of an airplane, but they would think that it was some sort of giant, massive, loud, thunderous bird. So, is this where some of our Thunderbird legends come from? Is maybe one of these airplanes did disappear through a portal, went back in time, and the indigenous peoples of that time saw it, and those were the stories that they told.
We have examples of that even in a contemporary period with cargo cults.
Yes, cargo cults. There you go. Absolutely.
If you set aside the plausibility argument about whether or not there is time travel, just that scenario altogether of suggesting that if indigenous people a long time ago see a plane breaking through a Stargate, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know what to make of that. How could you? And it would almost be perhaps like what would happen with us when we see the UAP or UFO phenomena that I have heard, I'm sure you've read as well, of people suggesting that some of those are linked to time travel, that perhaps it's not extraterrestrial, perhaps it's not even our own government, but perhaps it's a version of us in the future coming back to the past,
Right.
which would be the present.
And yeah, and I do have some comments about that because I have heard some of my colleagues say that, well, you know, they're not extraterrestrials at all. All that we are seeing here are ourselves from the future. And so, and that's, you know, boom, that's it. That's their whole theory. And I kind of scratch my head. I'm like, I can't sit here and say every single UFO UAP is a time traveler or us from the future. For a variety of different reasons. We're talking, there's been crash material that has been recovered. There are people that have, and people that I know that I believe are credible that have reported actually witnessing and observing some, extraterrestrial bodies, these sorts of things. So I believe that there are some physical craft that have traversed the cosmos. However they did it, we could throw out all kinds of different possibilities because our current Newtonian physics just isn't going to cut it. So, kind of strapping a rocket to ourselves and shooting ourselves up, that takes too long to get to the outer reaches of space. I mean, look at Voyager. I mean, it's what some years ago now it did finally pass through the solar system, but it's 50 years now it's been up there, and it's just now reaching those edges, and so that's a lifetime. So we don't know how they may have traveled here, but they could have used. We're talking Stargates. They could have used, some sort of, technology like that. Maybe they are coming from some other dimension somewhere. Maybe they are, here on Earth alongside of us this whole time. The idea of an ultra-terrestrial, the idea of a time traveler. I will say, sure, maybe some of them are, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's us. There could be something indigenous here to Earth, but it doesn't have to be human. You
Right.
think about, the Earth right now, it's 4.5 billion years old, and we've only been around for a small fraction of it. We put it into some context. The dinosaurs went extinct about 64 million years ago, so that's just a little over 1% of the entire lifespan of the Earth ago. Um, so that's huge for us. Homo sapiens sapiens first came out, at least our oldest ones that we're finding are about 315,000 years old. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the number.
Yeah.
Um, so we haven't been around all that long. Now, are we going to make it? We'll just say 64 million years, and we're going to make it another little over 1% of the lifespan of the Earth, or are we going to annihilate ourselves? Are we going to do something to hurt the planet that we have to, kind of accelerate getting off of it, that sort of thing. So we might not even be around here that far into the future. So it could be another intelligent life form that evolves here on Earth, develops civilization, develops technology and time travel technology. And we can even go down the route of extraterrestrials, maybe, a billion years from now. And we got another five approximately left here on Earth before the sun becomes a red giant and destroys us. So maybe it's a billion years from now. Humanity's completely gone, but maybe an extraterrestrial civilization colonizes here. They deem it habitable for them, and they build their civilization and their technology, and maybe they develop time travel technology that goes back to look at the history of the Earth. So yeah, it could be something. It could be a time traveler here on Earth, but it doesn't mean it has to be human. It doesn't have to be us.
That's a good point. I've been interested in this concept of ultra-terrestrials as of late. That one is another mind bender, but I think it's a fascinating one. For anybody who doesn't know, could you maybe explain a little bit more about what an ultra-terrestrial is?
Yeah, so we're talking about other indigenous life forms that are living beside us here on Earth. They could be physically here with us. They could be in another dimension beside us, but something that is indigenous to Earth that is also here with us. And I've done some research in the American Southwest, the Montezuma's Well area, and this was kind of an interesting connection I've made here recently. And I was put onto that by my good friend James Keenan. I was down in the area for a couple of conferences, and you say, oh, you got to get together with Clifford Mahooty and research that area. And Clifford, he passed away here not too long ago, and I wasn't able to connect with him on that trip because he was unfortunately starting to deteriorate at that time. But he's a Zuni elder, and he had done a lot to try to pass on that knowledge from his tribe. And one of those stories around the Montezuma's well area there in the Verde Valley, and it's a cataclysm story. So basically, cataclysms occurring, humans are getting destroyed, and so these beings that lived underground there at Montezuma as well, called them the ant people, because they had those type of characteristics. Basically, brought the humans underground, kept them safe until everything had subsided and it was safe to go back up to the surface again. And then the people came up and populated the area, built their cliff dwellings and all this. So it's an origin story for their culture. And of course, kept in the back of my mind, okay, ant people, because I've had people ask me in the past, about these different praying mantis types and all these different things. I've always been a little bit skeptical of some of that, but then just recently here, within the last couple of years, there's research done by Paula Harris and Jacques Vallée about a crash near the Trinity testing site just after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima back in 1945. And it was these two young boys who had gone down, saw the crash site. It was later picked up by the U.S. government, of course. And the way that they described the beings were like these ant people. So, it started making me wonder, okay, are we seeing a connection here that, an ultra-terrestrial type of connection where you have these beings that live underground, and maybe some of the UFOs and UAPs that we're seeing are these beings that do live here alongside us, but in these deeper places.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you probably a low-hanging fruit question, but I just have to
Okay.
ask. This is very low ball. Mandela effects.
Yeah.
Is it Berenstein Bears or Berenstain Bears? Which is it, Mike? Tell me. I gotta know. I thought it was Berenstein. I swear.
Right.
That's the timeline I'm on. I'm also I'm timeline Jiffy peanut butter.
Oh, Jiffy instead of Jiff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole when Nelson, and where it all kind of started when Nelson Mandela passed away, that one did kind of take me by surprise too. I had thought that he had already passed. I thought he was already dead, but no. And I do include in the book some material there on the Mandela effect. And it's a lengthy story. But my mother and I experienced the same thing and you would not find this story in any of those Mandela effect lists, unless, since my book has been out, they've added it to that list. I've talked about it on my podcast and stuff before. But okay, let me just say this. Nobody's going back in time to purposely change the branding of Fruit of the Loom, or change the spelling of Oscar Mayer. I mean, no, that's too trivial. Nobody's going back in time to do that. But I do believe that some of these things that we are seeing and experiencing that cause us to question, did something change in the past? And I believe the answer in many cases, I do believe some of them are just misremembering things, but I think something is being changed, and it's really more the result of like the butterfly effect. So somebody goes back in time, and they may just even go back in time as an observer, but their presence there has some ramifications. Just crossing a street and a car has to slow down for you to cross the street will just change the trajectory and the timeline of whoever was in that car and what is going to happen to them further down the road. Maybe they end up having to stop at a red light at the bottom of the hill there, and before they would have gone through it, and you're already on the path of changing somebody's life there. So is it things like that where somebody went back in time, unbeknownst to them, changed something really minor, and the resulting effect of that over all the different iterations, somebody decided to put a cornucopia behind Fruit of the Loom at one point, and somehow that changed, and now it's not there for whatever reason. Maybe we'll take the guy driving down the road there. Maybe he was on his way to work on that branding, and the first timeline that he was on, he passed a fruit stand that had a cornucopia. I was like, I like that. That's kind of cool, and included that in the artwork. And then because somebody, I'll just say, somebody crossed the road in front of him, and he had to go a different route or something, he didn't pass that fruit stand, and the thought didn't occur to him to include that in the branding. I mean, that's just totally arbitrary example, but
it's a good example. It makes more sense than nefarious individuals traveling back in time simply to change the branding on things that we remember from childhood. That's a little
it's changed the way Fruit Loops is spelled. Yes.
Yeah.
Mess with you.
They're like evil geniuses, but perhaps it does come down to there was a traffic jam on Madison Avenue back in the day and made a lot of branding executives late for work and they all had to rethink what they were doing. So maybe it's just that. But no, that is fascinating. I'll tell you though, the Fruit of the Loom one I think is the one that actually gets me because I'm like, I think it did have a cornucopia.
I'm pretty sure it did too.
I feel like that's one of the only ones I truly feel like strongly about. I'm like the rest of them are silly, but
as a young boy, 7, 8, 9 years old, and that's essentially what I grew up wearing every single day of my childhood. I'm pretty sure I have an idea of what the branding looked like on the little tag that was in there. Yeah.
I think that was the first time I ever really knew what a cornucopia was. So
yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, not like we recognize it. I mean, Thanksgiving perhaps, but that's about it. So yeah, I don't know. That's wild. I actually I have a few questions that have been submitted. I thought I might get into these sooner rather than later because they're kind of when I told my community on the Midnight Academy community page that you were coming on, I got a lot of enthusiasm. So yes, very excited to have you on. So I'm going to ask, you sort of covered a little bit of this, but Israel wanted to ask a little bit more about the Bermuda Triangle. Are there other places? I know there's the Alaska Triangle. I know there's some of these, but some of the ones he mentioned, I'm not familiar with. Are there such portals, triangles, anything like that elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty much all over the world. Ivan T. Sanderson did his work with the Vile Vortices, which were more significant ones. Bermuda Triangle's included in that, as is the Dragon's Triangle out there by Japan. And so I think that really got people interested in doing that sort of research and realizing there are other places around the world that have this strange energy and this strange activity that's associated with it. So like Romania, the Hoia Baciu forest, that has some really, really fascinating stories associated with it. But to me, it's just blatant that it's some sort of energetic area. Is you have a clearing in the middle of the forest where nothing grows, and then the trees that are around it, the trees actually bend very strangely. It's really, really bizarre to look at the photos to see these trunks that are kind of bending inwards. And then you have that clearing where nothing grows. So, I mean, personally, I think it's probably a meteorite or something like that that's long since buried under there. Because really what's happening here in these different locations is like the triangles and all that. It all starts with the Earth's core, which is a molten ball of iron that's spinning around and around, creating this massive magnetic field, which is wonderful for us because that shields us from a lot of the solar wind and the sun's harmful rays and all of that sort of thing. So it's really beneficial to humans. But as it's passing through the Earth's mantle and crust, it's interacting with different minerals and metals and different quantities of them. And depending on the mineral or metal that it interacts with and how big that deposit is, it's going to create more localized electromagnetic fields. So, yeah, Hoia Baciu, that's a place where you have these really, really interesting stories going back to its origins thousands of years ago, where the forest was named for a boy named Baciu who had 200 sheep with him, and they went into the forest and never returned. Just never came out of the forest, and nobody found any remains. Not him. Not. I mean, 200 sheep's quite a lot. Yeah, and back at the time, I mean, you could consider sheep to be almost like gold. I mean, they're going to be valuable to the locals in the area. So for those to go just missing like that, it's kind of a big deal. So another interesting story out of there. It happened some years later. The 5-year-old girl went walking into the forest one day and went missing, gone. The town tragedy. Parents are upset. and all that for a long time. 5 years pass. The little girl walks right back out of the forest, not having aged. She's still 5 years old 5 years later. She's supposed to be looking like a 10-year-old. And she walks out of the forest as if nothing happened. So did she step into some sort of portal or something like this out there in the wilderness?
Do you think it has to do with the ley lines or anything like that? Do you think those play a part?
Well, yeah. So I say it's really the telluric currents that we're talking about. So ley lines is kind of like the layman's term for telluric currents. Nobody wants to say telluric currents, right?
I mean, it's
Or
like a
where
tongue twister, telluric currents, telluric,
yeah,
say it a couple times.
or where they cross. I mean, we call them like
Mhm.
energy nodes, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, the ley lines cross. You got these energy nodes. They're conductivity discontinuities. Nobody wants to say that either.
Maybe we should, because it's a little more precise and it'd help
It
people be
is.
able to research it
Yeah.
better. Because like I said, this is not my bailiwick, so I am learning a lot of this, and I'm familiar with the folk language of ley lines and
Yeah. Well,
portals.
what the lay is it's a geographic lining up of all of these different sites. And why they're lined up like that is the ancients built them on top of these energy currents. So they were smart. They knew, okay, where are our sacred sites? Where do we want to build these? Where are we, tapping into energy? And they could have been using it for a lot of different things, healing purposes, entering into altered states of consciousness. You see a lot of astronomical alignments and calendrical purposes and things like this as well. But you find a lot of rituals have been done at these sites, like if we're talking stone circles and these sorts of things. And then you kind of have to ask the question, okay, well, is there enough going on here that maybe it did at some point open up some sort of a portal.
Hmm.
There's a interesting one about Stonehenge, and it is kind of an urban legend, but uh, it's there's always to me that grain of truth in there that this was like late 60s, early 70s, back when you could actually walk up to Stonehenge and hang out. That there was a group of young adults that were up there camping the one night, and they're having a good time, but a storm had rolled in, and there was a policeman that was passing by and a farmer who had been, I guess, out in his field or something that night, and they both saw this massive. It was basically like a lightning strike, but the whole place lit up blue with lightning, and uh, it basically struck Stonehenge, or at least lit up the area near Stonehenge. I can't quite recall if it actually struck it, but in any case, you heard these cries come out from these they call them the Stonehenge hippies. You heard the cries of the kids, and so they went running up there to take a look, and they were all gone. They completely disappeared. So did something happen within that electrical storm that activated some ancient technology at Stonehenge that opened the portal for them to pass through?
Well, it's kind of spooky.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so there's that. Well, I have now. This might be a little technical question about that. And again, forgive me if I don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't.
Sure.
But in the situation that Baval points out, with the age of the Sphinx being so much older potentially, and
Mhm.
it's facing the constellation Leo, but then over time there's a shift, and so things aren't lining up quite the same. Precession of the equinox, all
Procession.
of this.
Yeah.
So um how, if this is, and I think there's something to be said for that, so just for the
Mhm.
record, but
Sure.
if that's the case, does that affect the energy nodes underneath?
Yeah, they're always shifting and moving, and it's not just like a steady stream.
Hmm.
It pulsates. So I think that's where a lot of our um, when we look at a lot of our ancient texts, or look at Egypt and all the wonderful things that are written on the walls there, and they're keeping track of those astronomical alignments. I believe that they're keeping track of those prime times, for
Mm.
lack of a better term, to really be able to use their ancient sites. That's why they were doing them on the solstice, the equinox, or some of these other important times during the year, because these were the times in which there was going to be more energy to be able to work with.
So is that energy underground, say? Is there a connection between that and the stars, the celestial realm?
There is. We have just outside the planet, and even NASA has recognized this. We have portals in space. They call them X points, and they've been researching them for almost 10 years now. They've had some satellites up there, but there's no real predictive model. So basically, what's happening is it's where the Earth's magnetosphere and the solar wind meet each other. And these portals basically open and close at will, different sizes. They'll stay open for different lengths of time, but they can't ever say, okay, when is it going to open? How big is it going to open? And how long is it going to be open for? And they've been studying this stuff for almost 10 years now. So if they are acknowledging this is something that we have going on in space, then why wouldn't it also be happening here on Earth? We still have the Earth's magnetism here on Earth, obviously, and the solar wind still comes down and hits us all the way to the ground. So, yeah, I think we would still have those effects here on Earth too.
So as above, so below.
Exactly.
I foreshadowed this one, but Crypto Kev asks, "What's your opinion on John Teeter?"
Midnight Academy asked some good questions. I just want to
It's a place of learning.
Yeah, no, I want to see more is kind of what it comes
Yeah.
down to. Yeah.
Where's he been? He's not floating around, is he?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
He probably fell down Mel's hole.
Maybe.
Okay, and he also asked, Stargates around the world, did we invade Iraq to steal them?
Oh boy. No, there's the loaded question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we definitely took something there because, I mean, you had objects and artifacts that were hidden away in the back room, and they knew exactly what to go grab and where it was. So, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that was our only reason for going into Iraq, but that was one of the, I think that was one of the things that, hey, while we're there, let's go get a few things.
Without a doubt. And that came out in court too. So it's not just a conspiracy. Right. That was definitely how we know the details of what it is that they took, and some of the things that really are peculiar about that situation is that they left a lot of the artifacts that would be very valuable.
Yeah.
So they went in for things very specific. So a few of the arguments about that as well, if they took something so valuable, then it would have easily been identified on the black market. So then they would have been implicated. So they didn't do it for that reason. Plausible, but there were a lot of things and things that maybe wouldn't have been easily identified or traced on the market that way. So, but clearly they had a list of things, and they've still not recovered everything that they lost. So.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. And you and I have had this conversation before, because I saw this in Egypt too, that you have those private collectors and people around the world that are looking for those quote unquote powered pieces because they believe it's going to give them some sort of enhanced abilities, enhanced powers. And a few years back when I was in Egypt, they had just at the Temple of Dendara opened up the second crypt. So the crypt that has been open for all these years, where the quote unquote Dendara light bulb is, basically it's not a crypt as in people were buried there or anything like that. It's just this tight, narrow passageway underneath the temple, and there's one on either side. And they actually have some that are above in the walls too. I just got into one this past year that was, you have to take a ladder up there and climb in, and then it's just this narrow hall, but it's like a whole shrine to Hathor. So when I was back there in 2021, they had opened up the second crypt under the ground on the other side from where the light bulb was at, and it had been closed off for like 20 years. So we're down there taking a look, and there are these like massive blocks that have been taken out of the wall, and kind of looking down to the ground, it's like, well, it didn't disintegrate into rubble. I mean, sure, they could have cleaned it up or whatever, but you're looking at where the block had been, and you're seeing these chisel marks that are back there on the wall where the block had been, and they're pretty fresh. There's no like real patina buildup or anything like that. It's these are white, and it's like this was pretty recent. So
Hmm.
went back upstairs and, asking a couple of the guys, okay, what happened down there? Where are those blocks? I can see it with my eyes. So that kind of pulled me aside, and they're basically the gist is that, over the last 20 years is, there were certain, power pieces that were marked, and there were, private bidders that were, private collectors that were bidding on those. So
Yeah.
it's really a shame to see that happen. I want to know what was on those pieces. Why were they considered power pieces? What's the information we're missing on those?
That's one of my big missions. I have this feeling. I have this feeling that there is, like the invisible college, right? I have a
Mhm.
feeling that there's somewhat of an equivalent, maybe, of a, a, a chimera of the invisible college in the Ononurbe.
Yeah.
That there are individuals who work in a circuit who work together to try to locate these power items for some bigger cause. And it's interesting, and I'm always interested in that and following
Mhm.
those paths. And gosh, I just want to know so bad. What is it? Do they really have power, or are these just the fantasies of elitists who have now gotten too much money and too much time and too much power, and they've
Right.
lost it? They're hovering over Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're just like, there's nothing there for me anymore.
Right.
Or is it that they have access to information we don't? And I can say they do have access to information that we don't, because they've had that access within their own private collections since before archaeology was a legitimate profession.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
there's,
absolutely.
and I'm sure you know of all the literature that's just been in people's homes, grand
Mhm.
homes, beautiful libraries, and they have all sorts of original documentation, very well preserved, and they just sit there and
Yeah.
waiting to be discovered. And many of these things are in different languages, and so people just they either don't speak the language, or there's so many different ways to put the barriers in front of researchers so that they can't acquire the information. So
Mhm.
it's definitely we have our work cut out for us.
We do. Yeah. This is where, put on the Indiana Jones hat, like, it belongs in a museum.
It does. I think, or at least I want to know.
Throughout Egypt, you see everywhere in the friezes and the artwork and all that, they're using the Waz scepters. Well, we've never found a single Waz scepter. The statue, even the statues, and they got the holes in the hands for it. And sure, that might have just been something that was on that particular statue, but you see, okay, here's the king, with the Waz scepter. Here's this god with the Waz scepter, and they're doing things like levitating the temple. So it's like, okay, these items were supposed to have had some sort of really significant power, but we don't have one. You
Yeah,
can't walk into the museum there in Cairo and actually see one on display. So what happened to them? Because it looked like they were all over the place in ancient Egypt. So is there one in somebody's collection somewhere? I have no idea.
very well could be. And then if it's another thing too that I often consider is the one of my favorite artifacts is the Antikythera mechanism.
Hmm.
So finding that, and so many people thought there was really nothing to it, but some dedicated researchers wouldn't take no for an answer, and they kept researching, and they found that this was in fact considered the world's first computer.
Yeah.
When you look at it, they've done some modeling now where they've been able to reconstruct what it looked like, and it's just an amazing piece of technology, beautiful, all things that are just stoking the imagination of people in the ancient world, just where you think I just it reminds me a little bit of the old movie. I guess they made a remake, but I don't think that one counts, but of Clash of the Titans,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
it's a very poor depiction of the ancient world, because everything is in ruins. And as we of course know, back then the statues were not white, they weren't crumbling
Mhm.
necessarily, they were
Right.
very vividly painted, some would say garishly painted, but you still have this adherence to this old antiquity. But then at the same time, the stark contrast between that setting and Bubo. the little mechanical
The little
owl.
mechanical owl, yeah.
I love it's like one of my favorites. So it kind of reminds me of that, where it's like this clash between, no pun intended, between the landscape that would seem less contemporary or less technically advanced, and then Bubo's like flying around like a little mechanical machine, machine that's
Right.
like a artificial intelligence. But that Antikythera mechanism, when you see it, it sort of does reinforce that idea that perhaps they had these technological pieces. But the question could be posed, why weren't they more available? Why is it that we've only found one? But one of the answers could very well be that they were very expensive and time consuming to make. It took a lot of resources, and the only people that would have access to those sorts of resources and the craftsmen would be people in positions of power, of which there weren't many comparatively. So,
Right.
so there's that to consider, that it wouldn't necessarily have been that if everybody, that if there was an anti-Kethra mechanism, that it was like one of those Texas Instrument calculators we were all told to get as a kid, and so we all just had one, right? It wouldn't have necessarily been that way. It would have been something that was so rare that it was in the hands of the elites, and so it could have gotten passed down. So there could be very few even left. That and
Right.
possibly that people just have found these things over time and have kept them.
Yeah, these things weren't mass produced. There
No,
weren't assembly lines back
correct.
then, right? So I think that's we get kind of our modern context
Mm.
kind of skews that sort of thing. Well, this is a great thing. Why didn't they make so many more of them? Well, that's a a very, very time consuming device to create. The amount of hours, and you're probably talking like there was one craftsman involved here. Maybe
Right.
there's another, maybe you had an apprentice and maybe pass down some information, but yeah, something like that is going to take an individual, I mean, maybe months to make with how intricate it is.
And it
Yeah,
would have
I
been
can imagine.
in that knowledge of how to do it would have been wrapped up with individuals, as you said, an individual,
Yeah.
perhaps a small group, maybe a secret guild would have the knowledge of how to make those things. It
Hmm.
would have been a source of power, because just like the origin of, say, the Freemasons before speculative Freemasonry, they had this power, as most guilds did, being able to say, we know how to do the math, how to do the building, to make these great things. And our client base is pretty limited to only people of great means. So we had to be free so that we could do our Masonic work. So, but have to tell people the secrets of how these, say, cathedrals were built, well, it would give you no leverage when working with the elites. So it was so important to keep the trade secrets. It wasn't just, what's in the secret sauce. This could be what keeps us in a position of privilege, whereas other people
Yeah.
didn't have that knowledge. So it's always about knowledge being power.
There is definitely that. And then there's, also a resource aspect. So, we've lost a lot of things over time just because your invading army decided to, oh, there's some gold over there, there's some metal, we're going to melt it down and use
Melt
it
it.
for our purposes.
Yep.
So we've lost a lot of things that way too. Yeah. And then when it comes to the knowledge, when people die, they take that knowledge with them to the grave unless they pass something on. And if the person that they pass it on to, they died as well, or maybe they didn't pass it on. So I get a lot of times when talking about uh, Egypt and the construction and the technology that they use to do some of these things, and people are like, well, why didn't that continue to get passed on? It's like, well, you know for one, we can sit there and debate as to who really built the pyramids. Now, the most of the temples themselves, I believe that yes, the ancient Egyptians um, built them. I believe the temples, like there at or the temples, the pyramids there at Giza, I believe that they were it was a pre-Diluvian civilization that built. There's no writing on them, and the dynastic Egyptians wrote on everything. So, um, but and you have to kind of look at that is okay. Well, what happened with dynastic Egypt? Well, they went through, there's a reason why we have the old kingdom, middle kingdom, new kingdom. There was a lot of strife, inner conflict there within Egypt. Times where there was a power vacuum. You didn't even know who was running Egypt at that time. And then finally, you had Alexander the Great come in and invade Egypt and set up, the Ptolemaic dynasty there. The Greeks who ran Egypt, which is where Cleopatra comes from. She was actually Greek, not Egyptian. She was the seventh one. People don't really realize, oh yeah, there were seven Cleopatras.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Cleopatra. The name comes from Kleos, which is like roughly translated to the glory, and Patra is father. So it's
mhm.
they, because there were more of them. The
Yes,
name was
yeah,
like the glory of her father,
hmm,
which is a Greek, clearly
which is
Greek.
Greek. And then after the Greeks, it was the Romans.
Mhm.
And the Romans were in control for a while. Then after the Romans, it was the Arab nations that they came in and just, so you have these, different nations that are coming in, taking control of Egypt. And it was the last scribe who could, read and write the hieroglyphs. He died around 300 AD or something like that. And that knowledge was lost for 1500 years, until Champollion came around and helped us out with the Rosetta Stone. Um, yeah, so that's how stuff gets lost to time.
Completely. Like the Roman concrete being the recipe for that being lost in the so-called Dark Ages, a time where it is not so easy to continue the civilization process, shall we say, or any kind of progress when you're just trying to survive. And there's
Well,
been a
yeah,
lot
and
of
that's a
tumult.
big thing.
Mhm.
If you have some sort of volcanic eruption, or and we could talk about the flood too, but any of these cataclysms that decimate civilization for any length of time, yeah, you're just in survival mode. You're not
Yeah,
worried about the finer things in life or creating massive buildings again or these really intricate devices. No, you're just trying to, you know,
rebuild.
you're just trying to rebuild. You need to put a little roof over your head.
Mm.
Maybe you're back out hunting and gathering for a little while until you can get things reestablished. And depending on how long it takes to recover, those artisans, they may not be able to pass down the knowledge from their previous craft. They might not be able to get back to it in their lifetime.
Yeah. And that again, that question of mass production, even if you have the information, they just weren't necessarily mass producing the things of importance. They were mass producing commodities. And you see that even now. I have a great example of that to hear this clock that I have for the Midnight Academy. This is an antique
Mm.
clock from the 1800s. It was one of the first, what's called a gingerbread. It's one of the first that was a kind of a big deal because while it's wood and it's very nice, it's, wind up, whatever, it was stamped out. It was made on a production line. Huge, huge turning point, because before that, only the elite could afford a clock.
Right.
Time was, I mean, that was something so amazing. Part of how we got this idea of God being a clockworker. Everything started having the point of reference of the gears and mechanical components of clock, because the clock was just like, wow, this is some high tech stuff here.
Yeah.
But it costs a lot of money to have a person be able to make a clock for you and then keep the time and caretake it and maintain it. And so it wasn't something that every household had. But eventually, because of industrialization, they found a way to punch out some of these gingerbread clocks, and then everybody started having them. And this one goes in a kitchen, has a kitchen timer too, which is funny. You could set a little timer for your baked goods.
Nice.
So it's like, then everybody has a clock. Now we just don't even think about it. But at one point, it would have been like an anti-Kethra mechanism. I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary that was on probably History or A&E, I think, many, many years ago. It was called Life After People. It was
Oh, no, I haven't
fantastic.
seen that.
Highly
Mm-mm.
recommend it. If you watch it, forgive it for its poor CGI. It was many years ago, but yes, it was multiple episodes, and it basically it was very well researched. Really, really great work on this, but it took a look at what would happen after a cataclysm. What would be the first things to go? How long would it take
Yeah.
for nature to reclaim? And unfortunately, in the economy that we've had for the past, gosh, at this point, maybe 15 plus years, there have been a lot of decline since the housing crash and whatnot. We have all seen what happens to buildings that don't get maintained and the blight
Mhm.
that happens, and how nature just starts to reclaim almost immediately, it seems, where there's
Yeah.
trees
Pretty quick.
growing in, roots, overgrowth, and sometimes buildings are getting completely covered up. So this documentary series looked at that, had experts weigh in, engineering experts and whatnot, talk about how long would it take, what would be left. Highly recommended. It's really eye-opening, and it gives you just a sense of how precarious civilization is and how it definitely lends itself to a stronger argument for there being an advanced civilization that just didn't quite leave the mark that we would expect or hope it to.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I'll have to check that out. There's a book I read several years ago, kind of a similar premise. It's called 1 Second After, and basically the premise of the book is there is a uh, massive EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that wiped out all electronics, which we rely on that today, and not just computers and cell phones, but our cars. They're all computerized these days. So it's kind of interesting where the only vehicles that were around that could be used were ones that were far older, that predated these newer computerized ones. Of course, things like gas were scarce, and immediately just the everything going bad at the supermarket, and so we have this food shortage. Because people don't know anymore how to handle not having a refrigerator. Who has a root cellar anymore, right? Um, we don't know anymore how to be able to preserve food. So it would absolutely decimate our society, something like that happening. And it would take those handful of people that still know how to do some of those things to help the others survive. And of course, you're going to have a lot of people that are going hungry, that you're going to have people fighting with each other. I'm going to come over here. You know how to do whatever to make or get food. I'm going to have have a weapon or whatever, and I'm going to come steal it from you. So you'd have a lot of that going on too. So you also consider those things when we talk about, some of these civilizations that rose up, and maybe they had whatever the cataclysm was or whatever the incident was that threw them backwards a bit. You're going to have all kinds of there'd be warring factions and strife, and a high amount of crime, these sorts of things, because it's just survival of the fittest at that point.
Like, speaking of media and whatnot, then I don't know if you've seen the film. There's also a book it came from, but the Road. So that one, that's a clear example. Not because of that film, but I think you just hit a certain age and realization about things. I started to realize that going to school and learning things and having everything kind of be stuck in a mental plane for me rendered me somewhat useless. Like, I can cook, I can do all those things, but in terms of canning or gardening or shooting, any of those things, I realized I'm kind of defenseless. And so I'm still on it, but I decided to go on a journey of being more useful and saying, I have to learn something other than just style guides and citations and how to do a qualitative analysis. And because even that might be helpful, but at the very end, when people are going down Cannibal Road, they're not going to look at me and say, we need to do a meta-analysis on whether, nope, I will be useless. So they're not going to take me with them. I think part of the catalyst for me getting a different mindset was my research into the Sumerian writings, some of the writings that talked about essentially where we get the idea of Noah, what was going on pre-flood, and the description of the breakaway civilization, that they weren't just saying, come on, folks, let's go. They were very selective about who was in on the travel plans for reasons that they knew they were making a breakaway civilization. So they selected the people that would be able to bring all of those skills, the sciences and the arts, and I would not have been one of them in that situation, probably. So I thought, I need to go hunting. And so I started learning all those things. And instead of thinking of it as like prepper, because I didn't want to start collecting canned goods, because I saw the road. Great. You're going to be sitting in there with some canned goods for how long? And they run out. So instead of prepping, I look at it as the surviving.
There you go.
So now I'm like, I'm plucking chickens. I'm the whole nine. I'm like on it. I still have not gone to the canning part yet. And the only reason, I have everything for it, I have the space. I just am so afraid that I'm going to give myself botulism.
Oh, geez.
It's like a really big fear. I'm like, I don't know if I trust it, So I need, like, what we need. I don't know. grandparents. Many of us
Right.
are lucky enough to have that, but so many more do not anymore. Families have broken down. There's
Yeah.
not just broken down from, say, divorce and whatnot, but there is this cultural shift where a lot of times we send our grandparents or whatnot off to homes, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of there's a lack of intergenerational knowledge sharing,
Right.
and I think that has really affected how we do things. And so we need more grandmas
We
and
do. Yeah, because back in the day,
grandfathers
you would,
too.
yeah, back in the day when grandma was getting too old, you'd bring her home with you and she'd stay in a spare bedroom or whatever. And yeah, she'd come out and, help with the cooking or whatever and
Yeah,
pass on some of that knowledge. And you're right, that doesn't happen so much
no,
anymore.
my
Yeah.
grandmother ended up getting dementia, and it was
Yeah.
pretty bad, but for a short time we had her in the home, and
Hmm.
she was the one who showed me how to take like the heaviest metal clamp and put it on the side of a table and like put foods in it and like grind it by hand to make like
Nice.
ground beef or even something for like a pie, or just
Hmm.
she taught me all kinds of those old fashioned cooking things. So I got it when it comes to just cooking from scratch. It's the
Nice.
canning part that's like
Yeah.
no botulism or whatever it is. Listeria. It's all
Right.
the
Yeah.
things,
Because
all the
yeah,
things.
my grandmother did a lot of that as well. So when she passed and it came to, cleaning out the cellar, I mean, there was shelves of jellies that had been there
Oh,
since
wow.
like 1972.
Oh, gosh.
Like,
Do they get better with age?
yeah,
I don't.
I don't wasn't gonna try any. No, it's like so yeah, there was there's always been a running joke in my family of just a phrase we use. Oh, that was before the war. Like if something was a long time ago, that was before the war. And it's like literally some of those things that were in the basement that were
Or,
canned were
oh
from
no.
before the war. It
Oh,
wasn't just a phrase.
oh gosh. Well, you know a few things about aging process and fermentation, right? You're a
I
winemaker.
make wine,
You make
yes.
wine. What got you into that?
My dad. So he started in 2007. Actually, it's my mom's fault. Um, she thought that if it was a Christmas present, 2006, that she got him a winemaking kit. She thought it might be something that he would be interested in doing, and so yeah, he tried it. He enjoyed doing it. He's like, "Hey, Mike, I got to show you how to do this." And so we did some wine together, and it's been a thing ever since. So yeah, I got a bunch that I've made, and I just go over to his house because he's got the whole setup in the basement there, and
Oh wow.
yeah, it's a good time. It's good
What's
father
your
son time.
what's your favorite kind of wine to make? Do you have a specific?
I mean, I'm more of a red wine type of a
Mhm.
guy. So what I've been doing here is, there are some Italian wines that I've been making, and I learned that, well, I mean, people know you can do different blends and stuff like that. So I've been trying to make super Tuscans. So using some of these different Italian wines and mixing it with the Merlot, and they call that a super Tuscan. So
Oh, cool.
yeah,
That's kind of cool. Or
yeah,
would you ever consider trying to make any of the wines that were made in the ancient world? I know they
that
have
would be pretty
some
cool. Yeah,
yeah. I know some people have done the beer from Sumer.
right.
There's a recipe for that. It doesn't quite look appetizing. It has a lot of floaties in it. But I hear it's very nutritious.
Okay.
There was a book about how beer is what built civilization. And the
Nice.
argument was the fermentation process was allowed for there to be an extraction of more nutrients and protein from the grain. And so they were kind of getting a condensed shot of nutrients, whereas they maybe wouldn't have. It also enabled people to have cleaner water,
Mhm.
more water ingested at that time, regardless of if it's a diuretic. I don't know, but it was one of those things where it enabled people to work a little harder and be a little healthier. So, I mean, I'll buy that for $1, but I know
Sure,
the
of course.
isn't that what you might know about this, but isn't there a wasn't there a hieroglyph that talked about some sort of a revolt of some of the workers? They were going on strike, if I remember it correctly, and they were demanding more beer,
More beer, right?
more
Yeah,
beer.
I have heard of that. Yep.
Yeah. So
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting now because it has to do with the religion for it's an Islamic country these days. So they're technically a dry country. Now they have all kinds of wine and stuff there and beers and things like that for the tourists. But
that's
yeah, there
good.
used to be. You look at the ancient world, they had all kinds of breweries. It was right next to the bakery. You had the bakery and then the brewery side by side.
Yeah, and these were sacred libations. These were used in rituals from the very beginning in Sumer, and whether it was beer or then later wine, they were very sacred. A lot of mystical connotation given the process of fermentation being sort of mysterious, invisible, taking one substance, transmuting it to another, that if you ingested it, gave you mystical experiences, perhaps made you more suggestible for rituals, what have you, but definitely enjoyable. If you've ever heard the Sumerian beer song, that's an oldie but a goodie. It is one that was translated from a tablet, and it was a hymn to the goddess of beer. And the academics who translated it went ahead and recorded the version that they had. It was as bad as you may think. It has this whole vibe of beer is good, the room is spinning, and it makes references to how the liver is just loving this beer. And I'm like,
Of
advanced,
course it is.
not too advanced,
Yeah.
just advanced enough. But no, maybe our livers aren't loving that beer. But yeah,
Right.
the Sumerian beer song. But they gathered around, and it was a jovial song that was meant to be sung together in a drinking kind of. I won't go so far as to say a bar, but like a ritual, fun sort of thing. So it's just amazing to know how long we've been doing those activities. I still don't trust myself making it though, because I would be the one to just be like, taste this wine, done, botulism, or whatever happens with
Yeah, I
wine. I
mean,
don't
you
know.
can make, well, what happens with the wine is it can turn to vinegar on you. So,
That's not
so you
good.
do have to be careful. I mean, that's a big step in, is keeping everything sanitized. And I don't know how they did that back in the day, because we actually use a sanitizer, right, to clean everything off so it doesn't get any bacteria, to turn your wine into vinegar.
Yeah,
But
I'm not actually sure either. I do know that the vinegar being a sanitizing agent in and of itself was a thought. One of the worst examples of that I can think of is the communal toilet wand that the Romans used. If you're familiar with that. I got a story with that. Yeah, it's as bad as it sounds.
oh
So
boy,
if you've ever seen pictures, I'll throw some up here, but of what it looked like, say in a Coliseum, to go to the restroom, it was just open air, little seats, and you just sit there next to your neighbor, like, "Hey, what's up, man?" And you just be going, and it would go. There was water that would run underneath, so it would sweep it away. I mean, pretty advanced. So
yeah.
the sanitation was phenomenal. But then comes the question of the cleanup. Well, they had wine containers essentially, and they would have a stick with a sponge on it. And that stick with the sponge would sit inside the container and it would have vinegar. And you would just reach in and just be like, doop, doop, do my business and put it back for your buddy beside you. Done too. Here's the stick. And that's how it was done. A
There you
couple of,
go.
a couple of like really depressing things about one depressing thing. I was researching for a paper once about traumatic brain injuries in gladiators. And I found this account from the person who was working with this particular gladiator. The gladiator had gone to the restroom and wasn't coming out. And they were like, come on, buddy, show's about to start. So they go and they get him and they walk in to find him dead. And how he had killed himself was he took the stick that people use for that activity and he impaled himself through like a sword swallower. He right down the mouth, gone.
Wow.
I came across that story because it was it was a primary source, presumably. And two, it sort of gave a little more credence to this idea that repeated abuse to the brain, when I was trying not to get too football oriented and reference it that way at that time, but it was sort of loosely aligned with that idea of the what happens when the concussions. So in a violent sport like being a gladiator, where you're really going to get those things, and this particular gladiator had been doing it for a while. He was considered pretty successful, and so he was living. That's how you knew you were successful, as you were alive. And so presumably he was getting hit in the head a lot. And for somebody to commit suicide is pretty bad, but then to also consider the violent manner with which he did it was also very troubling. And it was supposedly coming as quite a shock to everybody around. I mean, again, we weren't there, but we have the writing. But it was just something interesting, and just it stuck with me forever after that, thinking, wow. It also made me think about Gladiators, because that is one of my favorite films, is Gladiator with the Russell
That's a good one.
Crowe.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie. That's one of the only
Are
movies
you
I'll
not
just.
entertained?
Are you not? Yes. I don't know about the new one coming out. I'm not having high hopes, but I love Gladiator. It's so inspiring. But it also, learning about their life and hearing that story made me really stop and think, these were human beings. These were people, and they suffered. So, and it's easy to glamorize it and, are you not entertained? And then think, wow, these people were suffering. And so
They really were. Yeah.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
just lending more humanity to the faces of history. But, and it's also said too, I think the paper just came out, might have just been last year even, or this year still, but not that long ago, a paper was published that had a religious scholar go through, and they found in the story of the crucifixion, there's a point where one of the soldiers gives Jesus a drink. The framing of it in theology is that Jesus was suffering, and one of the soldiers actually had a moment of compassion and offered him a drink. But when you actually do the translations and see what it was that they did, it specifically cites the name of the tool that's used in the toilet. So it changes the entire context to be that he did not feel mercy or any sense of humanity, but instead it was an act of humiliation. And when Jesus is crucified and dehydrated, that instead the final act of just absolute indignance and inhumanity is to take the toilet swab and put it to his mouth. That's new research, and that's fascinating. That's why I always tell people too, it doesn't matter if these tablets that come out, there's one sort of translation for them, and you have to be able to revisit all of these translations, especially things like the Sumerian tablets, because even now people are trying to translate and understand things that we pretty much thought we had covered, like ancient Greek or what have you, but there's still people discovering new information every day from that.
Yeah, and as we discover new information like that, it can put other information that we already had into a different context.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always smart to go back and revisit some of these things. Absolutely.
So where are you off to next? You've been super busy.
Yeah, my next tour is actually in Germany. That's
Ooh,
next April. So we're going to be exploring the Black Forest.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
No, that should be fun.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. So I have not yet been to Germany. It's always been someplace I've wanted to get to because I have family.
Same.
One part of my family is originally from there. So yeah, I've
Yeah.
always wanted to get out there.
Me too. That's on the bucket list. I'm German as well, so gotta go see what all the fuss is about in that Black Forest, especially. That one's pretty
Right?
amazing. But so if somebody did want to go, somebody was like, I gotta go to the Black Forest with Mike Ricksecker. How do they do that?
Yeah, very easy. Just go to the events and tours page on my website, mikericksecker.com, and it's right there. Just click on that. It'll take you to the where it's set up on We Travel, and you don't have to pay for it all at once. There's a whole payment plan that you can take advantage of, so that it's a little bit easier to afford.
Well, that's cool. That's actually very helpful. I know a lot of people are looking to travel, but having a hard time parting with all the money up front. So to be able to kind
Yeah.
of plan it out like that, it also gives someone something to look forward to. So that's really cool. I don't know
Yeah,
if
we're gonna
any
be
other
doing that
people are
with
doing
the
that.
Yeah, we're gonna be doing that with the next Egypt tour as well. So, and that one hasn't yet officially been scheduled yet, but we already know November 2025. And yeah, that's one where it's like, you had your deposit and then, you had to, throw everything else out there later on, do your remainder later on. And yeah, doing the payment plan just makes it a little bit easier for people.
That's so cool. Well, I hope people will go and check that out because I've seen the pictures from your previous excursions, and everybody looks like they're having not only a blast, but it actually looks like it's more than just the typical sightseeing adventure. But it looks
Oh
like
yeah.
you're actually looking at important information and learning things along the way. And I know you share all of that information too with your audience on Connected Universe.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's a much deeper dive than just, there's a temple, there's the Sphinx, that sort of thing. Um, in this last tour, we had somebody who had already been to Egypt a couple years ago on a different tour that was more of the regular kind of mainstream, sightseeing sort of thing. And yeah, she absolutely loved our tour because it got in much deeper into a lot of the ideas and concepts of, and not just Stargates, just even the advanced technology, advanced tooling that you can see all throughout Egypt. That we're told that, well, they're just using stone and copper tools, and you're like, they did not carve granite like that with copper. No.
No,
um, yeah.
no,
So
that's
yeah,
so cool.
people really appreciate the depth of the knowledge that we provide.
And that's cool. And it gives everybody a chance to participate because if they can't necessarily find the time right now to go with you, I know that if they go and sign up for your community, they're able to basically feel like they're right there with you because you put up so
Yeah.
much content about the behind the scenes and what you're looking at. And it's pretty amazing. And I know my audience really likes to learn. And so this is definitely something that people should consider doing because it's more than just a sightseeing. As you said, it's definitely something education oriented
Mhm.
and fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you're correct. I put a lot of the material that I'm always taking video while I'm out there. So I put a lot of that video footage onto Connected Universe portal so that yeah, you can experience it that way too. Still not the same as actually being there, but there's a lot of material on the portal that people can experience and feel a part of it and learn a lot.
That's so cool. Wow. Well, I'm gonna have to check it out. Maybe I'll sign up for one of the tours too. It sounds like a lot of fun.
I'd love to have you along. Yes.
Great. Well, Mike, I want to really genuinely thank you for making time to come to the Midnight Academy. I know you have been just jet setting and doing all kinds of projects, so it really means a lot that you take the time.
Yeah, I'm back out to New York tomorrow.
Oh my gosh. Well, I will cut it short then so that you can get some rest and get ready for your next adventure.
I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Great. Thanks again.
Thank you, Heather. I always appreciate it.